All right, so are you ready to dive into a case that's really going to grab you?
Oh, absolutely. I've been looking forward to this one.
Today, we're looking at the disappearance of Mongchi G.
A young mom from China but living in Missouri.
Yeah, and vanished just like that in 2019.
It's crazy, right? Just gone.
And we've got a ton of stuff to go through.
A mountain of evidence, really.
We're talking court transcripts, interviews.
Police reports, even audio recordings.
Yeah, between Mongchi and her husband, Joseph Ell.
So, kind of like listening in on their lives before it all went wrong.
Exactly. And our goal here is to try to make sense of it all.
See if we can pick apart the different sides of the story.
Figure out how the investigators finally cracked the case.
Because this one is a real head-scratcher. Lots of twists and turns.
So let's get into it. Okay, October 10th, 2019, that's when it all starts.
Joe reports Mongchi missing.
But not to the police right away. He calls this 311 hotline.
Columbia, Missouri has this thing for citizens to call. Not quite 911.
Yeah, not for emergencies, exactly.
But here's the thing.
He's saying he hasn't seen Mongchi for 2 days already.
2 whole days. That's not how most folks react when someone's missing.
Right, like panic sets in way sooner.
Most people would be calling 911, calling everyone they know.
But 2 days of silence? Then a call to 311?
Yeah, unusual. And when the police do get involved, it gets even weirder.
Joe's story starts having these little details that don't quite fit.
It's like a puzzle where the pieces almost line up, but not quite.
He's saying everything was fine until he woke up, and Mongchi was just gone.
Vanished into thin air, basically.
But then he throws in this detail about giving Mongchi a massage the night before.
And saying he was going to try and initiate sex, but she wasn't into it.
Why would he even mention that?
It's almost like he's trying too hard to seem normal.
Trying to create this image of a loving relationship.
But it doesn't really have anything to do with her disappearance.
And then it gets even more bizarre.
Oh, yeah. What did he do?
Instead of, frantically searching for his wife,
You'd think that's what a worried husband would do.
Joe decides to take their baby daughter on a drive. To relax.
Relax. While his wife's missing.
Yeah, and not just a random drive. He goes to towns he's never even been to before.
Huh. That is strange.
Think about it. Your wife disappears.
And you decide, time for a road trip.
Exactly. Most people wouldn't react like that.
It's like he's almost putting distance between himself and their apartment.
Or maybe trying to make an alibi for himself, who knows?
I mean, it makes you wonder.
And here's another thing. Every time he left the apartment,
He'd lock the door.
but he'd lock it with Mongchi's keys.
So not his own keys.
Nope. If you were expecting your wife to come back,
You'd leave it unlocked, right?
or at least use your own keys, yeah.
It's almost like he knew she wasn't coming back.
It's just one of those things that makes you go,
A lot of these little actions, by themselves, maybe not so weird.
But taken together, it starts to look like something's off.
Definitely raises some eyebrows. And as the investigators dug deeper, they started to see the cracks in the facade.
Right, because up until this point, it's basically just Joe's word against nothing.
No one else to say what happened. But then the police start talking to friends and family.
And a whole other story starts to come out.
Different from this picture-perfect marriage Joe was describing.
Yeah, filled with tension, arguments, and a sense of control.
Mongchi's mother was really key here. She flew in from China to help with the search.
And she was very vocal about Joe.
She said he was controlling, possessive, hated when Mongchi went out without him.
So, not the loving husband he was making himself out to be.
Not at all. But we have to be clear what we mean by controlling.
Right, it's not always obvious.
It can be subtle, slowly taking away someone's independence.
Like checking their phone all the time, telling them who they can see.
Even using money to control their actions, it's all about power.
And Mongchi's mother's testimony was like a window into that dynamic.
The one Joe was trying to hide?
And then there's this weird interview Joe gives to the media.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing clips of that.
He calls Mongchi a good mother.
But in the past tense.
Like a slip of the tongue, almost like he'd already accepted she was gone.
That's a big red flag for investigators for sure.
So at this point, things are looking pretty suspicious. But the police need proof.
Something solid to connect Joe to Mongchi's disappearance.
And they find it, but in a really unexpected place.
His cell phone.
Yep. Turns out, cell phones are like gold mines for investigators these days.
They track our every move, basically.
And Joe's phone showed a lot about where he'd been in the days before and after Mongchi vanished.
And what did they find?
Well, it showed him going to these really remote spots along the Lamine River.
Lamine River? That rings a bell.
Yeah, and these places didn't match up at all with what he was saying about taking his daughter on hikes.
So he was lying about where he was going.
And those places he was going.
Isolated, wooded. Sounds like the kind of place you'd go to hide something.
Or someone. And remember, this is while he's playing the worried husband in public.
Trying to throw everyone off his trail.
And if that wasn't enough,
they found something else.
They found hours of audio recordings on his phone.
Well, like him singing karaoke or something?
Not exactly. It was arguments between him and Mongchi.
Oh, wow. So the police were basically listening in on their fights.
And these recordings were really disturbing. Joe was emotionally abusive, using racist language.
It must have been hard for Mengchi's family to hear those.
Oh, absolutely. But they also painted a really clear picture of what their relationship was like.
Not the happy marriage Joe was pretending it was.
So now, the police have the cell phone data, the recordings, and all this suspicious behavior.
They were starting to close in.
And then things get even more intense.
What happened? Did he try to run?
They catch him packing up his car, about to take off with his daughter.
So he was trying to flee.
It sure looks that way. And when they searched his apartment after arresting him,
they found more evidence.
Notebooks, but not just any notebooks.
What was in them?
One of them had these pre-written scripts for talking to the media.
Wow. Like he was anticipating becoming a suspect?
Yeah, trying to control the story before it even really started.
That's pretty calculated.
And then another notebook was like a diary, a really detailed log of everything he did in the days leading up to Mongchi's disappearance.
Documenting every single step he took.
It all felt very deliberate, like he was trying to create a false trail.
A very strange detail in a very strange case.
So Joe's in custody, but the big question remains, where is Mongchi?
Right, they still haven't found her.
The police launch a huge search, focusing on that Lemaine River area we talked about.
And it's winter.
Freezing temperatures, the river's massive.
Must have been like searching for a needle in a haystack.
Divers spent weeks out there using sonar, but nothing.
So frustrating for her family, I can't even imagine.
And on top of all of this, there's another battle going on.
The custody battle for Mengchi's daughter.
Her parents fly in from China to fight for custody.
And Joe's mother wants custody, too.
You believe that? The family of the man suspected of murdering her mother wants to raise the child.
I can see why the public was outraged. It's just wrong.
It raises so many questions about parental rights, what's best for the child.
In the end, they decide on a shared custody arrangement. Both sets of grandparents get to see her.
It's not ideal, but probably the best they could do in that awful situation.
A little bit of good news in a very dark story.
So, the search for Mongchi goes on. The custody battle rages.
And then what happens?
Almost a year after she vanished, Joseph Ell is charged.
Charged? But they still haven't found Mongchi.
They charged him with first-degree murder.
Wow, without a body. That's a bold move by the prosecution.
They were taking a big gamble, trying to convince a jury to convict without that key piece of evidence.
So how did they plan to do that? What evidence did they have? That's what we'll find out in the next part of our deep dive. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We're picking up right where we left off in the Mongchi G case. Remember, Joseph Ell's been charged with first-degree murder, even though they still haven't found Mengchi's body. It's pretty wild, right? To go to trial without a body, that's got to be tough for the prosecution.
It's definitely a challenge. They had to build a really solid case using what they call circumstantial evidence. Basically, a bunch of clues that together point to Joe's guilt.
So it's like a puzzle. They have to put all the pieces together to create a complete picture, even without that central piece. What were some of the key pieces they used?
Well, a big one was Joe's behavior, both before and after Mongchi vanished. Those trips to the Lemaine River, remember? The prosecution argued that he was scoping out a place to hide her body.
Makes sense, especially since he lied about them, said he was taking his daughter hiking.
Right, his cell phone data proved those were lies. And then there were those audio recordings. Those are really powerful.
Yeah, hearing Joe's own words, the threats, the abuse, must have been hard for Mengchi's family to hear.
Absolutely. But it showed the jury what their relationship was really like. The controlling behavior, the rage. It fit with the prosecution's theory that Joe killed Mongchi in a moment of anger.
So they're building a case that Joe had a reason to kill her, and that he was acting suspiciously afterward. But couldn't the defense just say, hey, being a jerk doesn't automatically make you a murderer?
Of course, and that's exactly what they did. They admitted that Joe killed Mongchi, but claimed it was an accident.
Wait, really? So they're saying he did it but didn't mean to?
Exactly. They said it happened during an argument. He pushed her, she fell, hit her head, and died. Even brought in experts to back up their story.
But the prosecution wasn't buying it.
Nope. They argued that even if it was a push, it had to be intentional, forceful, not just a little bump. And they kept pointing back to all the other evidence, the lies, the cover-up.
Plus there was that mud on Joe's boots, right? Didn't that tie him to the place where they eventually found Menki?
Yeah, that was huge. They had experts analyze the mud, and it matched the area where Menki was buried, even though they hadn't found her yet at that point.
So they had scientific proof that Joe was at that spot. Pretty amazing how science can help solve these cases.
It's incredible. And they also analyzed plant DNA. Turns out, some juniper needles on his boots matched a specific juniper tree near where they found Menki.
So they had even more evidence connecting him to the burial site. Sounds like they had a really strong case, even without the body.
It was definitely looking bad for Joe. And then just as the trial was ending, there was a major break in the case.
They found Menki.
They did. Buried in a shallow grave in Rockbridge Memorial State Park. You want to know the really sad part? That's the same park where Joe proposed to her.
Oh man, that's just awful. To bury her in a place that meant so much to them both.
It's heartbreaking. But finding her remains was the final nail in the coffin for Joe's defense. They couldn't deny it anymore.
So after all that, all the twists and turns, what happened? What was the verdict?
The jury found Joe guilty. Second-degree murder.
Second degree. I'm a little fuzzy on the difference between that and first degree.
It's about intent. First degree means it was planned, premeditated. Second degree means it was intentional, but happened in the heat of the moment.
So they didn't think he planned to kill her, but they did believe he meant to do it.
That's how they saw it, yeah. And in 2022, he was sentenced. Got 28 years for the murder, plus more time for child abuse and endangerment.
28 years.
Oh.
It's a long time, but I'm sure it doesn't feel like enough for Menki's family.
They finally got justice, but they'll never get Menki back. And there's still the question of her daughter.
Right, that custody battle we talked about. What happened with that?
That's something we'll dig into when we come back for the last part of our deep dive. So we've been going deep into the Mongchi G case, from her disappearance to the trial, all the twists and turns. And now we're at the part where we look at what happened after the verdict. Because even though the trial is over, the story doesn't just end there.
Right, we often think of the conviction, the sentence, as the ending. But for Menki's family, for everyone affected, it's just the beginning of a whole other chapter.
It's like Joseph Ell is in prison, paying for what he did. But Menki's gone, and her family has to deal with that loss every day. And then there's her daughter, growing up without her mom. That's going to be so tough.
It's just heartbreaking. What happened with that custody battle we talked about? Did they figure that out?
Yeah, thankfully, Menki's parents were able to see their granddaughter regularly. At least she has that connection to her mom's side of the family.
That's got to be so important, to hear stories about her mom, keep those memories alive.
Absolutely. It's a way for them to keep Menki's spirit present, even though she's not physically there. And the whole case, it really sparked a conversation about domestic violence, didn't it?
It did. It made people realize how often this happens, hidden away, that it could be happening to someone you know.
Menki's story was a wake-up call, showing that domestic violence can affect anyone, no matter who they are, where they come from.
It's a problem we all need to be aware of.
And it wasn't just about awareness. The case also showed how important forensic science is in these investigations.
Yeah, think about it. If they hadn't analyzed that mud on Joe's boots, that plant DNA,
they might never have been able to prove he was at the burial site.
Science was key to getting justice for Mongchi.
It showed that even when someone tries to hide the truth, science can often find a way to reveal it.
It's pretty incredible, really. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to remember Mongchi, not just as a victim, but as a person.
A daughter, a mother, a friend, someone who was loved and is deeply missed.
And her story reminds us that we all have a responsibility to speak up about domestic violence, to help those who are trapped in those situations.
We can't be bystanders. We need to be advocates for change, for a world where everyone feels safe in their own homes.
That's a powerful message. And to anyone listening, if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please reach out. There's help available.
The National Domestic Violence Hotline is a great resource. You don't have to go through this alone. There is hope.
We'll put all that information in the show notes. And that brings us to the end of another deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another story, another journey into the complexities of the human experience. Until then, stay curious and keep those minds open.